I don't want you to waste the opportunity that you had when you did things that weren't successful. You need to ask yourself, how can I improve when I did the things that weren't successful? How is that going to improve me? How is that going to improve the team? And how is that going to make us better?
We have to allow mistakes if we ever want to improve, because if you always know the right answer, if you always do the quote right thing, you don't actually learn. Welcome to Science of Leadership, the podcast dedicated to helping you become a better leader. Here, you'll gain valuable knowledge, hear inspiring stories, and learn the scientific principles that promote exceptional leadership. I'm Tom Collins, your host, and I'm thrilled to have you join us on this journey to becoming a better leader. Today, we're digging into a topic that might not seem intuitive to some: the role of a leader allowing mistakes. In a world that aims at and sometimes demands perfection, how does allowing mistakes make for a successful team? And that's exactly what we're going to explore today: how creating a culture that allows for mistakes can transform your organization.
All right, Tom, let's start with a hard truth. As leaders, we often preach innovation, cutting edge movements, and ideas while simultaneously squashing the very thing that drives it: an environment that's willing to allow for mistakes. We create spaces where people are honestly so afraid of failing that they stick to safe, proven ideas and methods. But here's the question: can you name a single great innovation that's ever come from playing it safe?
I don't think so. I think fundamentally, first, innovation is bringing usually two ideas from disparate environments or domains together in a way that hasn't been done before. And that requires some risk. A lot of times it requires great risk. With no risk, there's no reward, as they say. And so, yeah, I can't think of anything that's derived into greatness from playing it really safe, per se. Overly cautious, perhaps, maybe. Yeah.
That's right. Leaders, mentors who know how to do this allow for mistakes and let their teams do that. It doesn't mean that you're going to lower your standards and like, okay, you don't need to succeed. You can, but it does mean allowing the team to function without fear of failure. And it's that fear that will sometimes limit them if you create a place that doesn't allow that. Even as I say that, I imagine some of our listeners out there are quite skeptical about allowing mistakes. Many people, especially elite teams, might see mistakes as a slippery slope to outright failure. They may even view it as substandard and unallowable culture shift. But before we get too far into it and sort of how to apply that, let's do what we always do. Let's define what we're talking about.
Yeah, I like to certainly set the boundary conditions, as it were, to define what we're talking about. So, as I've been thinking about this, and I've thought about this for a while, and specifically our conversation before today, I've come to see that there are at least two environmental components to this idea of allowing mistakes. There's the pre-mistake component and the post-mistake component. The pre-mistake environment, if you will, is one that gives people the freedom to take thoughtful, calculated risks. And I think that's important. That's something that we need to make distinct, is that we're not talking about people going off doing insane things, loose cannons, risk, like for risk's sake. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about thoughtful, calculated risks that have the potential for failure. That requires psychological safety. So allowing for mistakes is again different than promoting incompetence or negligence.
Hmm.
We're not lowering our standards. We're creating room to improve, to grow, to be better, but that comes with risk. So trying something that didn't work is different than ignoring responsibilities or underperforming due to a lack of effort or capability, frankly. Second is having an allowance for mistakes resulting in psychological safety. Your team needs to know that bringing up mistakes won't result in public humiliation or career damage. And that
Hmm.
really means that as leaders, we have to model that. We have to model that vulnerability, um, you know, ourselves. And I think that for us in medicine, like there are a few fields where mistakes have come with a potential for higher cost, right? Certainly there are fields, the airline industry obviously is a field, and being an electrician, I have a cousin who works on power lines. Okay, like you make a mistake, that's it, game over, right? All sorts of things. If you make a mistake, if you don't put the bolt in right in this vehicle, maybe the wheel flies off and there's catastrophic failure or what have you. But in medicine, day in, day out, especially in a field like pediatric cardiac anesthesiology like yours, the tolerance limit is very small and the risk is high, and we don't allow mistakes for the sake of mistakes. And so I think this is certainly a conversation episode that where our primary jobs in the field of medicine come into play in this discussion, that we have to allow mistakes if we ever want to improve. Because what I tell my kids and others, but certainly my kids, is ultimately, if you always know the right answer, if you always do the quote right thing, you don't actually learn, right? Because you already knew the answer. You already knew what to do. You
Yeah.
haven't gotten better. You haven't learned. You haven't grown. And so I think that's the reality of this thing, is that if we're going to continue to learn, to grow, to be better, there has to be room for mistakes. Those organizations that are zero mistake organizations are zero learning organizations.
Yeah. I've got so many examples going through my head of this. Like one, sort of allowing for mistakes, like Major League Baseball, top of their game. They may get out 2 out of 3 times, but make it into the Hall of Fame. Like, do they get up and swing? Yes. You swung. You tried to do something. You tried to make the team better. You tried to score a run, but you didn't. You need to get up there and do that again, sort of allowing for those mistakes. What if you get up there and you don't swing the bat? Well, then we would have never pushed the team forward. I also, like, the story happened this Sunday. My son was at a soccer game. He had his soccer game first. My daughter had her second, and he was playing defense his game. And I was like, hey, after his game, we're watching my daughter's game. And I was like, hey, watch how this kid who's really good at playing defense, watch how he plays defense. He's like, why? He's like, I was like, well, you could pick up some little things. He's like, but what if I'm doing it okay? And I said the exact same thing. I was like, listen, if you're not waking up every day thinking, how am I going to be better tomorrow than I am today? I was like, do you think at 10 years old you've peaked in your soccer? Like,
He's
this is
made
it.
it.
I'm the top of the pyramid. I'm as good as I'm ever going to get. I was like, then fine. I also said the same thing to him. I was like, listen, if you always walk in the room and you think you're the smartest person in the room, you need to find a different room. Like, you need to find a different room. So let's get a little more into this of like, I think that's where a lot of people are going to have the issue you brought up of like, what's the a good example or the real difference in not encouraging failure, but encouraging innovation, occurring risk, different from allowing substandard performance? Because I think anybody in anything would know, well, how do you do that? It's a slippery slope. We want people to be innovative. We want them to always be improving, but we don't want to encourage mediocrity. We don't want to say the standard's not the standard and we're not going to hold ourselves to it. But at the same time, you're right. Like, if we're doing the same thing tomorrow that we did today, then a month will be outdated, even in medicine. If you're doing the same thing you did 5 years ago, medicine has passed you by and you're probably not doing standard of care anymore. So, do you have a good example of like how either defining those or a good example of somebody or an organization that really towed that line really well?
Yeah, I mean, there are a huge number of examples. I would say that first is the question is, what does it look like? And again, we're not lowering the standard. That's not what we're talking about here. We're not saying, okay, well, it's okay if your example of baseball, right? It's okay if 2 out of 3 kids that go to the OR to have a VSD closure don't make it, right? Like, that's not what we're
Yeah.
talking about. We're talking about, again, getting back to what I said earlier, thoughtful, calculated risk, and recognizing that a zero mistake environment is a non-learning environment. It's a difference when somebody looks at an opportunity and sees a potential for improvement and tries something and that doesn't work out.
Maybe even if it wasn't a mistake,
Right,
but like, how could this have done better?
right.
Yeah.
Versus a fear of failure
Hmm.
and never trying that. So I wrote a paper and we published that in the Annals of Surgery in 2020. And the title is, I think, something like Sacrificing the Future for the Sake of the Present. And I was talking about congenital heart surgery. Specifically, in the past, people, our field, like most of heart surgery, period, owes its origin to congenital heart surgery. So coronary artery bypass and valve replacements and all these things can be traced to what was done for children with congenital heart disease. And it was people doing things that were risky. They were risky, and they were able to create treatments for things that were untreatable. And children went from dying to having a 95% likelihood of living to be adults and be productive and have families and all this sort of stuff. And it changed the whole picture because those people were willing to take calculated, risky opportunities to do something better, to improve. And there was a lot of difficult outcomes as a result of that. But again, they were calculated, thoughtful, in conversation with other people. It wasn't a lone ranger off doing one thing without discussing this in broad groups. And that continues today. But if we look at congenital heart surgery over the last, I mean, during my career, there hasn't been any monstrous innovation. What we see is especially the influence of ranking systems like US News and World Report. And those ranking systems, frankly, are geared to sell ads and other things. But the existence of those ranking systems has created a system where nobody can fail, because if they fail, their rank goes down and fewer patients will go there, right? So those centers that used to innovate and lead the world in advancing care now are pulling back from advancing care, from doing those innovative things to get us that much further along in medicine, because if they make a mistake, it has very significant repercussions on their standing. And so what you see is the great surgeons are in the past or are soon to be. And those surgeons that are now out, they're not allowed to do the more challenging, like a Norwood or things, right? Like oh no, that has to be done by surgeon A who's been here a really long time. Right? Well, surgeon A is going to die or retire or something at some point. Somebody needs to know how to do that. Well, can't do that because surgeon A's got the best numbers. So surgeon B and C don't get to do that surgery. And so then you're left with a group of people who aren't as technically capable as that past generation. So anyway, so this idea has really significant repercussions in medicine and other fields. And again, I'm not advocating for loose cannons. I'm not advocating for incapable people doing things. In fact, what I'm advocating for creates more capable people. They have to have the opportunity to make a mistake, because if they don't, they will never learn. They'll never develop that skill. And we're talking about congenital heart surgery right now, but that applies everywhere. So a different example, I'm reminded of, I think it was in the 50s or 60s, right? Tom Watson was the head of IBM. And there's this story that there was a guy that worked at IBM, and he had made a mistake that, again, 50s or 60s, cost IBM something like $10 million. Okay? I
It's a lot
mean,
in the 50s and 60s.
that's a lot. I
It's
mean,
a
that's a
lot
lot
today.
now, dude. You know? So $10 million. So he shows up at Watson's office and he says, you know, sir, I made this mistake, and, you know, I'm here to
I'll pack
apologize.
my stuff.
You're right. And it's like,
I'll show
you know,
myself out.
right. I recognize that this cost me my job. And so he turns around to get ready to leave. And when Watson says, I'm not going to let you leave after we've just spent $10 million educating you.
Hmm.
Right? Like, how many organizations today would look at it that way? Hey, I'm breaking into the podcast conversation here to share with you an exciting announcement. If you've been following the Science of Leadership podcast for a while, you've heard me talk about the book I've been working on. Well, I'm delighted to share that after over 3 years of work, my book, The 4 Stars of Leadership, is finally available. I'm so proud of this book and what it represents. I'm certain that you're going to find it immensely interesting and helpful as a guide on your journey to becoming a better leader. Seriously, you don't want to miss this book. I'm including a link to the book in the description. I hope you'll order your copy today. And please share it with others who might be interested. Also, please be sure to share your thoughts about the book with me. Now, let's get back to this interesting conversation on the science of leadership.
I gotta be honest, I struggle with it as a leader myself, allowing grace in people I'm leading. And part of that is I want them really to succeed. Part of it is I know they're capable of better. But God, this really hits home of like, you've got to allow people to grow. And part of that growth is much like my children. Like, if they're learning how to play a sport or they're learning how to ride their bike, they're going to fall and they're going to scrape their knee. But they need to do that so that they can succeed, so that they can do whatever task. And you can expand that to, like you were saying, like, not that everything has to be a failure and you can't put guidelines on those failures and operate in a safe environment. Again, like, we're not talking about, all right, bird, go out of the nest. Oh, you fell to the ground. But, like you said, creating a safe culture where people don't feel out of control when they're doing
Yeah.
this. They don't feel unsupported, but they do feel like they can ask the question. I was listening, they just said, and I feel like the younger generation probably does this better than anybody, is they will come into a situation that maybe we've been doing for the same way. And they're like, is this the best way to do this?
Right.
Can we? And you could layer that into quality improvement or whatever, but like, there'll be things that I've known I've been doing for a while, and they'll be like, is this really the best way to do this? And part of me, whatever leadership role I has, is being willing to, even if I think the way that I'm doing it is good, or is to be able to take a step back and be like, I don't know. Let's look at this. Let's really examine it. And maybe we try a different route that isn't as successful, but then we've learned from that. We know how to do that. That's my biggest struggle is giving everyone the same grace and latitude to know that they can fail, and as a leader in any position that you're going to support them, that you're going to help them fail forward, that you're
Mhm.
not going to be belittling or derogatory, even in what we've talked about, even in humor, like even that we've talked about in a previous episode of, the need for humor, but not using it to belittle someone in that they fail and think you're going to come that. So I
Yeah,
guess
you
the
just
next
hit on
question,
something
go
you
ahead.
just hit on something that's got my wheels spinning and thinking, okay, in a very good way. We do things, and this is the way we do it, right? This is how you treat this patient. This is how you do this management thing or
This is the
whatever.
path. This is
Right.
the
This
path.
is
This is
this
the
is tried and
algorithm.
true. We know this, but maybe that's just the way that we've discovered so far that has the least amount of mistakes. We're still making mistakes, right? It's a mistake in a sense. We just don't know a better way. And maybe the only way to get to the better way is by recognizing that there is an opportunity for growth. It may come with, until we get it right, it may come with mistakes, an opportunity to mess it up some. But the assumption that we all operate under, is how we're doing it is the right way to do it.
Well, it goes back to one of the interviews of your book. I don't know which general said it, but there's a sort of a takeaway point. And he goes, I wake up every morning. Am I going to be better tomorrow or worse? There is no the same. So it's like, even if you're doing it the same way and that way is good, if you haven't improved, maybe that was a mistake. But like you said, you've got to have the safety to allow for that mistake, or to allow it to be better.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
that's sometimes I think the hard thing, especially because if you view it's good enough, like we seem to be doing a good job, there's no catastrophic problems.
right. And what are we comparing it to? You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
oh, this is good enough. Well, how do you know? Like, maybe you're like an order of magnitude away from what it could be, or maybe even more. Imagine if the folks back in Commodore 64 days were like, yeah, this computer's good enough. Right now we're
Look at
talking
it.
about,
We can play chess.
right, Pong or whatever. Like, now we're talking about quantum computing, right? Like solving things that take millennia to do with our best computers now in a blink of an eye. But you got to be in a place where you're willing to take that risk. Again, getting back to, it's calculated. It is, as you say, it's an environmental thing, right? Creating an environment of safety, psychological safety, and teamwork where everybody's looking at this. It's not just one person derelict and off and doing their own thing. It's really analyzing and saying, "Hey, can we be better in what we're doing here? How would we be better? What would that look like?"
Yeah. I mean, like, I guess the question is, why is it so important? Like, I mean, we've touched on that a little bit of why it is so important. Again, looking at this from a leadership lens, like why, like that's what all this is about. Why is it so important for the leader to understand this topic? Not only the people who are being led, but why is it so important for the leader to understand this and to really get this?
We create culture. Leaders create culture. If your culture in your organization is terrible, if you're the leader, it's your fault. If it's great, it's something that you had a very significant hand in with the other people. But a rotten culture is because of rotten leadership. And so this idea of psychological safety, where people can be honest about making mistakes, where they can be honest about failure, if you will. People get scared to death of failure, the word. But if people are in a place where they can admit that, then we can figure out how to fix it. If people are hiding those things, that erodes the culture. It erodes our efficacy in what we're trying to do. Imagine a scenario where somebody is, working on an assembly line and they know that this particular part that they're putting into the car is messed up because it's something they're doing. But if they admit that, maybe their job's at risk, which impacts their family, right? And who they are as a person and all this sort of stuff. So they're not going to admit it. Instead, they're going to turn out cars that are garbage, right? But if they're able to say, "Hey, look, I'm realizing I've made a mistake here. I don't really understand how to do this appropriately." Okay, well, let's fix that, right? Then the quality of the car is better. And now you create an environment where other people can go, "Hey, just so you know, every so often I screw up the windshield or the seat belt or whatever it is." Then suddenly everybody's able to say, "Yeah, let's fix that," right? And the quality of your product goes up immeasurably because suddenly all these things that have mistakes that people are hiding, those mistakes have been alleviated because people had the opportunity to actually admit it without fear of terrible repercussions, recrimination, so forth and so on. So I think that fundamentally, again, the leader's job is to create that environment for psychological safety. And the reality is, if we look at the studies, and I've mentioned the work of Amy Edmondson at Harvard in numerous podcast episodes, but she's done a number of studies that have shown the extraordinary importance of psychological safety with regard to
Hmm.
innovation, with regard to productivity, job satisfaction, commitment to the organization. There's so many things that, if you look at them, that are highly important for the success of an organization, directly tied to psychological safety. And the ability to make mistakes without being crushed by that, by admitting it, is fundamental to that psychological safety. Because if you think that, oh my goodness, if I make a mistake, it's going to cost me my job, it's going to cost me my livelihood, what's your natural response going to be? You're going to hide that stuff. But if you
Hmm.
know that, hey, this is an environment where I can say, I made a mistake here, let's fix it, and everybody works together to fix it in a supportive manner, that's golden.
When I think you get the true mentorship from your leader, if you don't have fear of bringing them a mistake, which is a problem, then you're sort of on an island to try to fix it. As you're talking, I'm imagining a middle linebacker with a really harsh coach who's like, do this, do your job, do your job. And they call a run defense. So he's like, this is my job. This is my, but then he's looking around and he sees the tight end come out into a pass play. And if he's afraid to make a mistake, then he's just going to stay in run coverage and he's going to miss the play and the team's going to be worse and he's going to make a mistake because he was so fearful of making a mistake. Whereas if he had a coaching staff that's like, listen, this is the play we're going to call, but you're out there. And if you see something, you have our permission to sort of change. Then he's like, wait a minute, I see something different. I know this was the call, but I'm going to do this. It might be a mistake, but I think this is what. Then he's allowed to make the team better, to be more reactive to things with, it's interesting. Sometimes I think that fear of making a mistake will make people make mistakes.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think that's been studied and shown,
Oh,
right?
wow.
Like, yeah, the more you worry about making a mistake, the more likely you are to make a mistake. It's and so that's definitely been shown in multiple studies. An example, a great example from Olympic history is Dan Jansen. Okay, he was speed skater. Okay, I forget what he maybe like the 1500. I think he was multiple distances. Okay, he was no
Mhm.
Apollo Ono, right? Like Apollo Ono crushed everybody. Dan Jansen had the opportunity to do the same thing. Like he had the world records and all this, and every time he got to the Olympics, he failed. He failed because he fell, and it got in his head, right? And so that's why sports psychologists exist, to get the players, the athletes, out of their own heads, to stop worrying about making a mistake. That's why most people are no good at golf, because they hit a slice and then they just perseverate on the slice. So then they go up to the ball and they say, "Oh my goodness, don't want to slice it," and they top the ball, or they
It's
slice it
like
again, or whatever it is. And so the same thing happens in pretty much every domain. People's confidence gets shaken, and then they worry about making a mistake, and then that's exactly what they do.
obviously, we sort of defined what it is and how we differentiate that from a substandard culture. Because I do think that's an important difference. It's like you said, the leader establishes the culture. And there's a very big difference in we're going to allow for a mediocre product. We're going to allow for mediocrity. And if you fail, it's fine. There's a difference between that and you need to try your hardest. But if you fail, that's okay. We're failing forward. We're going to be better tomorrow than we are today. That's a very, very different culture.
Yeah.
But we talked a little bit about the science of like why it's so important, how it increases productivity, job satisfaction, everything, like all the other things we've talked about in all our other episodes. This is a fundamental building block for it. But I guess the question is now, how do we do it? How do we as leaders establish that culture, establish that psychological safety zone? I mean, we can say it all we want to, we can put it in a memo, but that's probably not going to get it done. So how do we do it? How do we
Yeah.
get there?
Well, I think, as I sort of alluded to earlier, the culture comes from the top, right? And so the leader has to establish that mistakes are opportunities for learning. That's the first thing. See them for what they are, opportunities for learning. Okay, we did this a little bit incorrectly. Let's learn how to do it better. Okay. And that means actually believing it. Like this is not something you can just fake. Like,
Mhm.
I'm gonna pretend like I think failure is an opportunity for learning. No, that won't fly. You actually have to believe it. You actually have to see that mistakes are opportunities for learning and recognize that it's only a failure if you don't learn from it. right? So that's something I tell my kids all the time. It's only a failure if you don't learn from it. Otherwise, it's a learning opportunity. You're a better person. You've grown from it. I'd say that's the second thing.
I just wanted to mention one thing you sort of hit on there before I forget it. We've got somebody who runs our QI department who I think is really great at that, and he will even add he almost always depersonalizes an event.
Yeah, right. That's pretty
Something will happen,
typical
he'll
of
be like,
yeah.
"How did the system let us down? He's never like, "You did this." He's really great in that leadership technique of saying, "This is a problem for our entire department, whatever. How did the system let us down, and how do we improve that system?" So he's really great at sort of depersonalizing it as a leader and
Right.
making sure he's not laying it on someone's shoulders of, "You failed. This is your problem."
Right. I mean, fundamentally, that's the way we should look at this. So that we can add that to a, so far things I've hit on were, you know, first, see mistakes as opportunities for learning.
Mhm.
Two, recognize it's only a failure if you don't learn from it. Three, we'll insert that in the majority of cases, significant mistakes are systematic in nature, not due to one person's shortcoming. When we look at quality improvement, that's the outlook that system comes from. People put a kidney in the wrong person because of multiple steps in the system, not because the person who opened up the abdomen and inserted the donor kidney, right? Like there were a lot of steps that went into screwing that up royally. People amputate the wrong leg because of multiple steps in the system being wrong, being a failure. And so that's the same with anything, right? The Space Shuttle Challenger exploded because multiple steps in the system failed and people ignored it. So having that outlook that it's a systematic problem is another thing to really work on creating a system that, allows for mistakes because you stop seeing it as a personal issue. Because honestly, if you take a step back, the people that you're working with, if you're the leader, the people that you're working with hopefully are intelligent, thoughtful, work hard, committed to the organization and the mission. If they're not, you're the problem because you hired the wrong person or you haven't trained the right person or you have not set expectations accordingly. So fundamentally, if you have people in your group that you are supposed to be leading and they are a problem, you should be the one who's putting systems in place to fix that. Because again, most of the time, the people actually have capabilities. You're just not tapping into them appropriately. It's just easier to blame them for being lazy or stupid
Yeah.
or whatever it may be. So anyway, so that's the third one. See things as, big mistakes as systematic in nature. The third, or the fourth, which should have been probably maybe the first in the list, remember and admit your own mistakes and shortcomings. Like the power of that when the leader says, "Hey, I made a mistake here." I'm reminded of John F. Kennedy. I forget if it was, I think it was the Bay of Pigs. Okay, total screwed up, right? The whole thing. And Kennedy came out and he admitted it. He said, "Hey, I really botched this. Like this was a major mistake on my part." And his poll numbers went up.
Hmm.
And he basically said, "The worse I do, the more they like me." And it wasn't that. It was that he was honest. And he said, "Hey, I made a mistake." Contrast that against what we see currently in the world, right? People who do everything under the sun to avoid responsibility for admitting that they've made mistakes, so on. And the environment and the climate that creates. So that probably should be the first one on the list. But anyway, recognize and admit your own mistakes, shortcomings, and then the final one I would offer: reward honesty. I mean, when people admit they've screwed
Mm.
up, man, you've got to appreciate that. You've got to reward that. Hey, thanks for being honest about that. Thanks for your dedication to actually improving what you're doing and what we're doing as a team. I think that goes a tremendously long way in helping people feel that psychological safety that we talked about previously.
It's interesting you brought up the number 4, the leaders admitting their own mistakes. So my knee jerk is, well, if I admit my own mistakes, that'll undermine my authority. But you sort of speak directly against that. And when you think about it, of course, like to create a area of psychological safety and an environment that will help team members fail forward, you as a leader cannot be above that yourself. You cannot fail to be humble in your own mistakes. I think admitting those and presenting those and talking through those just tells everybody on the team, like, hey, we're all in this together.
Yeah.
This is how we're going to go forward.
I feel compelled to let all of our listeners in on a little secret. if you're a leader and you don't share that you make mistakes with those you lead, you're the only one who thinks that you don't make mistakes. All the people that you're leading are perfectly aware that you're human, that you screw up. They probably have a list, in fact. The less likely you are to share your mistakes with other people, the higher the likelihood that they've got a list delineating each and every one of your mistakes. So what we have to realize is that, if we're leaders and we're afraid that people will think less of us because we admit mistakes, we're fooling only ourselves because they are fully aware that we make mistakes.
Yeah. Even if we don't admit them, they know they're there. They're not
Right.
blind.
Yeah.
And they've probably have been on the receiving end of those, because many of the mistakes we make are going to have consequences for the people we're leading. Hey, you made that decision. Everybody knows that wasn't the right one. You had two, chose the bad one. I understand we are trying to move us forward, but and yeah, being able to, I mean, it sort of goes along with the other one of the characteristics, humility. You've got to have
Yeah.
humility in it to be like, I messed up. I'm not perfect. This is a problem. How can we do it better next time? How can we make it not happen again? How can we fix it? I'm reminded of Nick Saban. He's a great leader, obviously amazing college football. Like, he used to say, the standard is the standard. And when I first was reading about him, I just thought he held people to perfection and would have an organization that did not allow for mistakes. And he did hold them to a high standard. But he lost a national championship game and they were asking him about it. And he has this really great quote where he's like, I don't want you to waste the opportunity that you had when you did things that weren't successful. You need to ask yourself, how can I improve when I did the things that weren't successful? How is that going to improve me? How is that going to improve the team? And how is that going to make us better? Which, for somebody as accomplished and, as I would think, so rigid in his pursuit of perfection, it was an interesting thing that he sort of really keyed on one of the things that you talked about. How am I viewing this as an opportunity? And that's what he looked at it. And of course, he came back and won the national championship. But losing the national championship, we could be like, we failed this, we failed this. I don't want the opportunity of losing this game to pass us by. And then that's what he's telling his players. Like, how are you personally going to get better? Things you tried that weren't successful. And he really didn't even say a failure, that weren't successful. How's that going to make you a better player next year? How's that going to make our team better from that? So it's an interesting viewpoint from somebody I, I didn't think would be as welcoming of failures.
Yeah. I mean, he's got a good book that's out. It's, I think, How Good Do You Want to Be? Something like that is the title of it. Nick Saban. I read. I would recommend that to folks. I'm reminded of a sort of axiom, if you will, that I share with a lot of my mentees in our field with regard to when we lose a kid, right? Like when we have a kid who goes to the OR and because of some series of events, whether highly complex patient, something went awry in the OR or postoperatively, and I think about it with regard to when we're reviewing the case afterward, what we would know in medicine as M&M, morbidity and mortality. But in other fields, like it might be an after action review in the military or other things, but basically reviewing the case. And certainly there are times when there are people who cannot bring themselves to admit that perhaps the system didn't work or perhaps their role in the system was suboptimal, things of that nature. And so what I tell my mentees is we have a moral obligation to learn from the death of a child. When we, and we being the royal we, our system, when that happens, when we make a mistake, and it's not always a mistake, it's like it's the nature of the situation. But if we don't learn from that, that's inexcusable. That is ethically, morally inexcusable. And I think to some degree, not to that level. I mean, we're not, people that are making cars or pizza pies or whatever they're making, right? And they're doing out there. It's not a child having congenital heart surgery. But if you don't learn from the mistake and you're basically embracing failure, there's something terribly wrong about that, especially as a leader, because it's your job to help those that you lead be the best that they can be, to achieve greater things. And if you're accepting that failure and you're not learning from it, whatever domain you're operating in, I think there's something really, really deeply wrong about that.
We've constantly gone back to the difference between managers and leaders. And I think this is a huge point that you just sort of went on that I wanted to summarize. I think managers, in many instances, something doesn't go perfectly, or sales are down, or this product fails, or this launch was bad. Managers look to lay the blame at someone's feet. All right, whose fault is it? Where are we going? And it's really different and in stark contrast. And I think this is what would make a great leader is in the same situation, they look at it. How are we learning this? Let's take the opportunity to learn. And there was never a whose fault is it, who's blame, but how are we as a team, as a group, as individuals moving forward? And that really is mentorship, right? I mean, how
Yeah.
many of your mentees have had research projects that would look as failures? Like, okay, maybe they didn't get the outcome that they wanted. Maybe they didn't answer the question that they wanted, but what did we achieve and how can we move forward from it? How the fundamental question we keep getting back to in all of these, how are we going to be better tomorrow?
Yeah.
Like, I woke up today, I know what I was with. How am I going to be better tomorrow? And this is a huge one,
Yeah.
allowing mistakes of ourselves, but also demonstrating that and allowing mistakes and failures. And well, I guess we can relabel it opportunities for our
Yeah.
team.
Mhm.
I think that's tough as a human to not see something go wrong and be like, it's not my fault. I didn't do it. But that's the difference in a leader, right? And
Mhm.
a manager.
Justin, I think that's a great way to end out what I think has been an excellent conversation. Thank you for joining us on this episode of The Science of Leadership. We hope today's discussion has inspired you and given you valuable insights to help you become a better leader. Remember, leadership is about helping those we lead do great things. It's a journey of continual growth and learning. When we embrace that journey with curiosity, courage, and humility, we can confront challenges, overcome barriers, and foster environments where everyone can succeed. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to follow or subscribe, leave a comment, and share it with others who are passionate about leadership. Until next week, keep leading with character, competence, caring, and communication. This is Tom Collins. Let's keep growing.